just off of media reports, as well as the things that bad guys were saying, it really looked like this was a cartel.
This is the Havoc Podcast. I'm your host, Tom DeQuino. The date is April 15th, 2022. And joining me today is a man who is a threat report production machine, Jon DiMaggio. He's a chief security strategist at Analyst One. Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So it's my pleasure, actually. Absolutely. Glad to be here. And I'm just going to say real quick, you got a little bit of a shiner under your eye there. That was not from me trying to abuse you into getting on the show. You did this willingly, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I was actually I was playing catch. My son's into baseball, and we were playing catch, and the sun was in my eye, and I used my face to catch the ball. So, of course, right before we're going to do this, but yeah, it could have been a lot worse.
For sure. Well,
so at least I walked away with just a shiner and not a concussion.
That's right, exactly. Well, it happens to the best of us, and I appreciate you coming on the show regardless. And you know what? No harm in and showing the world that you can catch a ball with your face. That's
right. That's right.
That.
My last name's DiMaggio. So, apparently I didn't get the skill, but we got good baseball stories in the same.
That's great. Awesome. So we're gonna talk about some research that you did that culminated in the release of a couple of different reports. I'll give the titles to the reports in a minute, and of course the links to the reports will be in the show notes. But before we get into that, give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I actually started out my career as a network engineer. I did that for a number of years. I was big into Cisco networks and did all the certifications and things like that. Started my first job as a help desk with General Dynamics, and they got me a clearance. As time evolved, I ended up doing the network security side, got into vulnerability assessments. And I had a program manager who left eventually, and he left the sort of the administrative side, and he went to the government and was managing a program doing threat intelligence. And it was just at the right time. It was right when sort of that first class of what I'm going to call nation state hackers in China had sort of graduated and were in military units and really started to hit the U.S. hard. And the United States government was trying to take intelligence analysts and sort of marry them up to different technical capabilities in order to have, more technical threat intelligence reporting. And, so basically my manager my previous program manager talked with the government customers like, hey, I got a guy, he can write, he can talk, and he's technical. He just needs to be trained in intel. And I think it'd be easier to train somebody in intelligence than it will be to train intelligence analysts on technical. And so the rest was history. I went in and talked to them. And, when I saw getting to really chase real world bad guys versus fighting with a router or a switch or a firewall, I never looked back. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but with the opportunity of which path to go, I was like, I'm going to start fresh somewhere, but I was so drawn to it and so excited about it that I went into that. And next thing I knew, I went through a bunch of, they taught me, sent me to school. I learned all about intelligence analysis, analysis as a whole, threat models, what to do, what not to do, how to keep the human aspect out of it, and to keep your answers honest and factual and scientific. And that just married up with everything else. It just clicked for me. Mm-hmm. So I never looked back and have enjoyed it ever since. So I worked for the government for about 14 years. I was a signals intelligence analyst. I eventually I just sort of realized that over time, a lot of the bad guys that I was chasing, that they were the same bad guys that we were seeing targeting the private sector. And I think that one of the first ones that really, got the public aware was when Sony got hit. And that was right around the time when I got out. I'd gotten out maybe a year before I left the government and went to the private sector. But I just really felt that there was, at that time anyway, a lack of seasoned experts in nation state attacks, and we were just getting, destroyed out there, seeing banks, technology companies, engineering companies. It was no longer just military, government, and defense contractors.
Yeah.
We were seeing, even mom and pop shops getting hit. So anyway, I felt like it made a difference in the government, and I felt like I could make even more of a difference in the private sector. And that sort of led me to the path I'm on today. The difference being those first, I think, 7 years that I did it. I was at Symantec when I got out of the government. I went to work for Symantec, and I was really fortunate. I got to be on a team, what I'm going to call it was an elite team. I mean, these guys were just badasses, and there was so much to learn, especially leaving an environment where I had all these secret squirrel tools. What I found was those actually let me not phrase it that way. What I found was by not having those tools, I had to work a lot harder, be more creative, and it made me a better analyst to not have them. So Symantec and those guys over there on my team, they had taught me a lot. And it was the attack investigation team. It doesn't exist anymore today, but it was great. And we did some of the most well-known investigations into nation state attacks that are out there, and we did quite a number of public reports on there to sort of get the word out. And I just, I thrived and I loved that stuff, and it just got me going every day. And eventually, about a year and a half ago, I left and I joined Analyst One. And similar role, but in this role, I get everything I do is public. So I get sort of to go after and chase whatever bad guys I want to. I've got a lot of freedom, and I get to write and share all of it at a public level. So that's sort of in a nutshell my background. Probably a little more long-winded description.
No, it's really fascinating, and how amazing that is it that like you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, and an opportunity that like really just works with your personality and just completely speaks to you presented itself, and off you go, and that's awesome.
Well, there was no talking at conferences or doing podcasts or writing public reports when I was in the government. It was like me and 5 other people that got to read the stuff. So while I loved the cool aspect of it, I worked through that and went as far as I wanted to go with it, and it was just the right time to make that leap. And while it was a very scary leap, I'm so glad that I made it, because the best part of my career, the most enjoyable and fulfilling aspect, has really been since I left the government. And you think it's the opposite, because I did such cool stuff there, but then I had to work so much harder on this side to do it. So it just felt more worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad too, because here we are having this conversation, and like you said, how awesome is it that, all this work, you can pursue these passion projects, if you will, right, in terms of investigations, and then make it public and share it with the community, which is just a heck of a contribution, right? So really appreciative of that. And for you coming on and given us an opportunity to talk about it. In addition to, all this investigative work that you do in these, and I said you're a threat intel report production machine, because you got, I mean, every few months there's another one cranked out, and these things are pretty elaborate, 40, 50, 60 pages, most of them, right?
Yes.
Right. So
people will love it or they hate it, but they're thorough.
Yeah, very complete, very thorough. Exactly. But in addition to that, you've also written a book called The Art of Cyber Warfare: An Investigator's Guide to Espionage, Ransomware, and Organized Crime. That's amazing. First off, congratulations on publishing a book. Not a lot.
Thank you. I forget about that when you ask me about my background and stuff, because it's so recent. It feels weird to be a published author. Like it hasn't sunk in yet. So when you ask me my background stuff, like it's not automatic for me to say that, because that wasn't the case, 2 months ago. So it's very new. But thank you. The book is also something like that was something I did, separate from my day job. So it's all I've been doing is living and breathing, threat intelligence and doing this now for the past, 3 years between my day job and writing this book. I mean, it's like I dream about threat intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes through for sure. For the readers of the book, are they going to have an inside track on these reports? Like, are they going to see principles that you lay out in the book evident in the reports that you're producing for Analyst One?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. So one of the things that I found through the years is that we as defenders and organizations really don't treat advanced threats or nation state attacks the way that they need to be treated and handled, the way that we respond, the way that we identify, the way that we mitigate them.
Mhm.
It's not effective. And one of the reasons it's not effective is because 90% of the attacks that a security operations center see every year are going to be, your regular day-to-day types of criminal attacks and attackers. But that 10% of the activity that's related to an advanced threat like a nation state is so much more damaging because you have an objective oriented human behind it, and when you shut the door on one way in, they're going to find a different way to come
Yeah.
in, and what they're doing is their objective and what things they want to get are so much more severe than your typical attacks. So you have to treat them completely different, and it's a completely different animal. It's almost like looking at it from a police officer who wants to just stop the crime, to a detective who actually goes in and wants to know who did this, what's their background, are they part of organized crime, who are they affiliate with. That's an analogy that a guy I used to work with used to always say, and it's just always stuck with me over the
Yes.
years. Because but back to answer your question though, yes, because of that sort of that teaching, that detective aspect to it, the models, the analysis, the attribution lessons that are in it, if you stick to those, it'll keep you honest, and it'll make you a better analyst. And all of those I apply in every report that I write. I apply those theories and those models in order to come up with my analytical conclusions at the end of my reports. So to answer your question, yes, all the things I teach in it are things that are used in my products today. And if you look at it through those eyes, sort of that X-ray vision to think about what's behind it, you can see a repetitiveness of how I go through the steps to sort of not just tell the story, but to come to these conclusions, and present you with something that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. Methodology. I'm always a big fan of methodologies that you can follow to produce consistent results, right? Like that's
consistent reporting. That's absolutely right. That's so important to be able to repeat your what you do, and have a consistent output.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. Give us one thing you'd like listeners to know about the book. Maybe you just said it in the previous answer, but I'll ask that anyway.
Yeah. So really the most important, the awareness that I just wanted. So the book's not just for analysts. The first half of it it goes through cool investigations and stories from over the years, but really lays the foundation for why you can't treat advanced attacks the same as your day to day. But yeah, that's I think that's the one biggest takeaway that I want to leave with it is, you have to treat nation state attacks completely different, and advanced attacks, ransomware too, it completely different. When you have a human behind it, these human driven attacks have to be completely handled differently than your typical activity. And because it's such a small percentage of what most defenders see, they just aren't aware of that, or they don't maybe appreciate that aspect of when they do find something advanced and how they handle it. So yeah, that would be the biggest thing to take away, is that you have to treat it differently. And I'm not going to try to explain right here how that difference is, but I give you not just tell you, I give you a lot of solid examples of what happens when you don't, throughout the book.
Well, go get the book to find that out, right? That's the
absolutely.
that's
the story. I hope so. I really enjoyed writing the book.
Yeah.
It was something I just loved doing.
Yeah, awesome. So let's go ahead and dive into these reports real quick. I'll just say, well, let me give the titles real quick. So the first report released in April of 2021 is called Ransom Mafia: Analysis of the World's First Ransomware Cartel. And the second report released in August of 2021, Absolute Ransom, Nation State Ransomware. That's the report I have on the screen behind us here. And I was going to say, with respect to your book and how you were saying you got to treat these adversaries differently, right? We're starting to see, as these reports show, that those lines are blurring now between what an advanced attack is, a nation state actor, versus just what used to be run-of-the-mill ransomware isn't so run-of-the-mill anymore.
Right. Yeah. Tom, I'll never forget it. It was it was May 12th, 2017. My boss came to me and said, I need you to look at this ransomware attack. And that was back when we still worked in an office. And, I said to the guy next to me and one of my peer analysts, I was like, what the hell does he have us looking at ransomware for? Like, that's, I was like, that's like this stuff that anybody can do. Like, why are we looking at this? And boy, did I put my foot in my mouth, because that was WannaCry, and it was the biggest ransomware attack the world had seen, and I had just been like, why are we looking at this? And so I've never looked at it the same. And actually, since then, I've really, for the reasons you just said, how they've really adapted sort of those advanced techniques from nation state attackers. That's mostly what I do these days are ransomware, because they're such a big threat and they're so similar. We did such a good job publicly documenting what all these nation state attackers were doing. We really laid the groundwork for basic criminals to adopt and use in their attacks, unfortunately. But you got to understand it to defend against it. So there's good and bad in both. It's a double-edged sword. Yeah. But that's kind of where we're at today, and still dabble in the nation state, obviously. But ransomware has been such a big problem that really takes up a lot of my time now.
Yeah, absolutely. So just again, it's stated again, the first report, Ransom Mafia, focusing on the aspect of a ransomware cartel. The second one, Absolute Ransom, focusing on the nation state ransomware aspects of this. We're talking about these reports together because there's a common thread between them. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Writing one is while I was still writing the first one, I realized that there was too much circumstantial evidence out there that was linking these. I just kept getting pushed back to the Russian government and Russian intelligence agencies. And while I didn't have the smoking gun, I was like, I need to put all this in my report. And I was like, this is just too much to put into a single report. So let me table this. Let me finish this cartel piece, and then let me go back and really sink my teeth in and see what I could find with links with ransomware gangs and the Russian government. And that's sort of how the two reports were born. But yes, they absolutely. If you read the first one, you'll see the connections when you read the second.
Yeah, it's incredibly interesting, and I see why you're like, I got to pull on this thread, right? I can't just leave this alone. Yeah.
Yes,
that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So let's start by just take us through the objectives of each of the reports as you state them in the report, if you could.
Sure. So let's start with the ransomware cartel piece, since that's what I wrote first. So when I wrote the ransomware cartel, that actually started, I was reading an article by Bleeping Computer, and I thought it was really interesting. They actually had quotes from two different ransomware gangs. And, these ransomware gangs were putting themselves out there. They were talking to the press. I looked into it further. They had, their own websites with press release sections. And I was like, wow, have times changed? Where now we've got bad guys that are making themselves available. And they were even to certain security investigators, they'd even respond and talk to them. So I found it really interesting that they were claiming to be in a cartel. And, these by themselves were very well-known groups that were, taking up headlines of most national newspapers, at one point or another. And they're claiming now to work together. Well, that was a big problem. If they're working together, their threat and their risk level, everything goes up to targets. That's a much bigger threat to your organization. Yeah. If you now have, instead of one, you have multiple groups working together. So I wanted to assess, is this real or is this not real? Because one of the things that also came out, when I was looking at it, is these guys had big egos. They talked a lot. Both publicly and then on the dark web in a lot of the private forums. But they, for lack of better words, just couldn't stop running their mouth, which was great for me digging in. Yeah. So I really kind of felt like I needed to assess if they were a real cartel. So, I broke it down into each group, and I really dug into not just the motivations or the commentary or the technical breakdown of it, but I really wanted to dig into the human aspect. And, I developed fake personas. I got onto different forums. I got into different chat rooms. I interacted as much as I could, with these guys. And, there's obviously a language gap because I don't speak Russian. But like I said, a lot of the activity and in the forums isn't only isn't only for Russian speakers. But,
Mhm.
I presented myself even sometimes as a security researcher, didn't even lie about who I am. I would just talk to them and they'd be willing to talk back. So point being, between listening, interacting, I was able to gain a ton of intel, and then taking the sort of technical aspects from the attack, breaking it down, looking at the overlap, and then collecting all the wallets for payments. I was in seeing how, if money was shared, where it was going, how it was distributed, doing all of that. I mean, I lived and breathed this, nonstop it was 3 months of research from start to finish. And when I was done, I felt like I had a really good picture to make an assessment. So the objectives were to assess the cartel, to find what level they were working together, if they were sharing money, and whether or not it really was a cartel, or whether this was, a media piece to sort of pressure victims into paying
Yeah.
ransoms because they're now a larger threat.
Right. Got it.
Did you want me to jump into the second one, or
Yeah.
do you want
Yeah.
to pivot from?
Let's go ahead.
Okay.
Go through the second one too, real quick.
So as I mentioned, while I was doing this research, I kept finding these what I'll call, at first anyway, circumstantial links, going back to the government, or people in the dark web making claims that the different groups were working with the FSB and things like that. So as I was going, and some were even trying to name names, and then I started looking at indictments, and I was finding links to other criminal organizations that weren't ransomware gangs, but it was all just too interesting. So that just, I like I said, I sort of put that all into a different bucket. And then when I finished the cartel, I started to dig in. So the objectives for the ransomware, the nation state ransomware paper, was really to look at the links, whether they were circumstantial, whether they were bad guys making claims, or whether they were governments that were, putting out indictments and making claims. To look at all of that together, to weed out, the low, medium, and high level links, what their evidence and what the confidence rating of how accurate they were, and then sort of to build a big picture to make that assessment. So what I found was a lot of people had done this before and looked at like one single event, but nobody had looked at big picture. And I went back from like 2007 to 2021, looking at all of this and putting it together, and then zooming out and looking at all of the activity, and that told a much stronger and more interesting story. So that was the objective, was to really to get the information, put an assessment of how strong it was, and to look at it from a big picture to tell what was what, and to make a more accurate assessment.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but there were some really interesting links that came out of that, which is absolutely amazing, and it really helps to tell the story that we were just talking about, frankly, in fact, about how the line is blurring, right?
Yeah.
It makes complete sense based on what you shared in the report. So love that. I'll say, jumping into the Ransom Mafia report, starting there, I noticed early on in the report the use of language that basically indicates like some acceptance on your part that a cartel may exist, but in reality, that the real situation is a bit more nuanced than that. Is that
Yes.
safe to say?
Yes. It's very safe to say. So, by doing sort of, without repeating a little bit what I said earlier, by looking at the technical overlap, by looking at the human element, the things that were claimed, and the things that were disputed, looking at where the money actually was going and how they were being distributed, looking at all of it made a much clearer picture. And you don't want to go into something making an assumption, and just off of media reports, as well as the things that bad guys were saying, it really looked like this was a cartel. But that's kind of what I went back before when I was mentioning sort of that learning how to be a good analyst and going to school to be an intelligence analyst before. One of the things that it taught me was, no matter how much you assume or you think you know something, you have to follow the data. Now, there's nothing wrong with making assumptions as long as you state that this is an analytical theory, or versus an assessment. But you need to stick to where the facts go and let that draw your picture.
Mm.
So when I actually did that, what I found was, these groups were they knew each other, they were sharing with one another. But to be a cartel, there has to be sort of a head of the snake, and that's providing that leadership and that guidance. But more importantly, there has to be money sharing. So that's that funding that would allow them to do much bigger and more nefarious acts as a group.
Yeah.
And that's what was not happening. They were making money, but that money was not being shared as a whole. It was being shared amongst the individual groups, and it was more like they were friends with one another, knew each other, and were helping each other out, much like we do as analysts from different companies. Sometimes we'll work together on an investigation or put out a report together, but that doesn't mean that we're the same company or corporation. Well, that's what it ended up being with this. These guys seemed to know each other, work together, but it was a lot of propaganda, something that we see frequently from Russia. So, in the government side. So why not on the on the criminal side? And of course, that leads into the second part: is it really just the criminal side, or was there a government side to it?
Yeah. That's so kind of funny. They're no more of a cartel than you and I are.
Correct.
But some really interesting links in there nonetheless. So yeah, you alluded to it a little bit. Let's talk through the ransomware gangs. Can you take us through the affiliated gangs that were claiming this cartel status?
Yes. So you had a group called Twisted Spider. Twisted Spider is known for using their first campaign, or I'd say year of operations. They used what's called the Maze ransomware variant. Eventually, they pretended to retire, and they came back with a new variant, which was called Egregor. But it was the same bad guys. They just rebranded. They had too much heat on them. Much of which came from them stating they were a cartel, which got additional law enforcement resources to look at them.
Mm.
But anyway, so they were basically working under Maze and then Egregor. There's a second group, which is called Wizard Spider. Wizard Spider is the most advanced out of the gangs that were in the alleged cartel. And Wizard Spider ran two operations concurrently and still do today using Conti ransomware and Ryuk ransomware. They also had access to a lot more malware and technical resources than the other gangs. Next, we had Lockbit. So the Lockbit gang, they used the Lockbit ransomware. I hate using the same name for a gang as the ransomware payload, but not all of them have other names. So that's just what it is. But the Lockbit gang was another one, and they're still thriving today and conducting major attacks today. The next one is a group called a gang called the Suncrypt gang. Now, they to me are very interesting, and the Suncrypt gang was their involvement with the cartel was actually contested by Twisted Spider, which is the Maisie Gregor guys. So, and that argument is what took place that Bleeping Computer captured, which just sort of got me interested in whether or not it was a real cartel or not. And it just sort of, like I said, led to kind of digging into all of this and trying to assess who did what and what was the most interesting aspect to it and whether or not it was legitimate or not. And then there's another gang, the last out of the group that was called Viking Spider. And I like to use the CrowdStrike names when they're available for these. But Viking Spider is the last group, and they used a ransomware variant known as Ragnarlocker. And while they weren't they didn't have the most resources. Like I said, that was Wizard Spider and may not have been as technical. They were by far the most creative group out of all of them. And they came up with new ways to compromise targets that had never been done before and new ways to extort targets that had never been done before. So they actually were pretty interesting to that story. One other thing I wanted to know is with these cartel groups that I just said, something that was also very interesting when I started to dig in is Twisted Spider was the first group to start stealing data and using that as a second extortion to leak data, which has now been adapted by almost every single ransomware gang out there. But they were the first to do that. So there was a lot of cutting edge things about this, alleged cartel, especially when you looked at them together, that really made me want to research and write about it.
Yeah, and again, I mean, on the surface, it certainly fit the bill as a cartel because of all of those aspects, right? Where they're adopting each other's techniques, they're maybe sharing some infrastructure or tooling or whatever. There's definitely some coordination happening amongst them, which maybe that in of itself is maybe not quite as cartel-esque or as concerning as the cartel aspect that we're familiar with, but as a defender, that's something that we not only need to be aware of, but concerned about, right? Because
Right.
their sophistication keeps going up as a result of, the fact that they're working together, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, and they were also sharing victim data. That's what I thought was also scary, because now you don't have to worry about just one group having access to your stolen sensitive data. They were sharing it with other gangs who also posted it on their data leak site. So it just, and that part actually happened too. So that wasn't just talk. So
yeah,
that made it pretty interesting. What was so ironic, though, is the two groups that did the most sharing were the two groups that disputed whether they were both in the cartel. That was Suncrypt and Twisted Spider, and they had the most, like I said, the most things shared data, the shared infrastructure, things like that, and they were the ones that were arguing about who was in the cartel and who wasn't. So it was kind of ironic.
yeah, hilarious. So there's some interesting things that took place with respect to Twisted Spider. Like you said, they're super vocal, kind of seem to be like the face or the voice of the so-called
Yeah.
cartel, right? But as you alluded to earlier, like that kind of ended up getting them into some trouble, right?
Yeah.
And they got cracked down on a little bit as a result. Lots of really interesting stuff in there. There's a mountain of data. I'll just focus on a few things that stood out to me. First off, like the Twisted Spider group, they all seem that they all kind of fit this bill, but the Twisted Spider group in particular seems pretty cheeky as far as their like you said, they got a really strong ego, right? I mean, they did some. They issue press releases. They talk to reporters. They talk to researchers openly. They send their ransom notes to their victims' printers. Like there's an entry in the report that says, I'm just going to quote this here. It says, in some attacks, the ransom note prints repeatedly from all printers within the environment. In at least one attack, it printed tiny ransom notes onto receipt tape from a point of sale systems. Like,
Right.
I mean, these guys are really feeling themselves, right? That
Right.
to be
Right.
doing stuff
Yes.
like that. Like they're just messing with this.
Agree.
Yeah. So, coming back to you labeled Wizard Spider as the most experienced attacker of the gangs. So elaborate on that a little bit more. Tell us why you put that label on him.
So Wizard Spider, not only were they running, they're the only one that was running two concurrent operations, so Ryuk and Kanti ransomware operations, but they also had a bunch of other unique aspects to their attacks. Like they had, developed their own malware. It's called like Bizarre Loader, for example. They used quite a few different custom built hack tools. It just that they had so many more unique developed binaries that they would use in their attack that would take a long time and a lot of work to use that no one else did. Most other attackers will use stuff that's publicly available, or they'll buy malware that's already out there for the outer elements of the attack, not the ransomware payload, but the getting into the network and what you do once you're in some of those tools. And Wizard Spider is the only one that had all these other resources that they developed themselves. And to do that, you have to have a lot of people, a lot of developers, because you got to create it, maintain it, test it, keep it from being detected by antivirus. So it's not an easy thing to do. So I thought that when I was writing the report, like, wow, this has to be a large group, in addition to running two different operations. But we now know, since in February, when the Conti leak happened, where we got all the inside data and chat logs and everything else within that particular operation, we now know that that's accurate. They have they were employing hundreds of people to run this. We're the most advanced out of the group, had the biggest technical capability, and more importantly, they were the most disciplined. Those guys didn't run their mouth publicly. You didn't hear a lot from them. And one of the first times where they did open their mouths, it really bit them in the ass. And that was when we saw the Conti leak thing happen, when they started getting into politics with the Ukraine-Russia war in February, and that didn't work out for them. So I don't think we'll hear too much more from them. I think they've learned from that.
Yeah. Once bitten, twice shy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There was some interesting, you were talking just a minute ago about the getting into the environments in the first place. There was some use of Trickbot in some really interesting ways. Talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that. It feels like there's a compelling lesson in there for defenders to me as well.
Yeah, so that's when I was talking about some of the resources, the outliner resources they use to gain initial access and things like that. So Trickbot is one of the main malwares that they use, malware variants that they used for that in their initial access. And Trickbot is used by other gangs, but it is not publicly available. So what I mean, or was not, but was used by a lot of gangs and was not publicly available. But it was used, so it was obviously shared amongst different Russian cyber criminal groups. So people don't realize how small the Russian criminal community is and how linked in those guys are to one another. And because of that, these guys know each other. They would work together, and we would see Trickbot being used. So Wizard Spider used it. There were other gangs that have used it too that didn't have anything to do with the cartel, but Revil used it. EvilCorp used it. EvilCorp rather has used it. So there's multiple, but the point is that it's not available to all criminals. You can't just go to a marketplace and buy access to it. So that was kind of unique to me, that it was sort of this closed, group of gangs that were all out of Russia that were using it. But that Trickbot element, that in itself is a major operation, and it essentially was run by, some of this is my opinion, some of this is from U.S. indictments, but it was run by a smaller group, and they sort of, would provide access for a fee to sort of trusted entities that they knew in order to conduct attacks. And Wizard Spider was one of those groups, one of the primary users of it, for
Mm.
that matter.
Yeah, yeah, and ultimately, like the initial purpose of the of that malware is a little bit different from what Wizard Spider's objective was, or probably a lot different from what Wizard Spider's objective was. But
Absolutely.
they figured out, like, hey, this thing is really prevalent, so let's just piggyback on that, and then we'll do what we
Yes.
need to do once we get in from Trickbot, right? Was that?
Yes. So that's that's kind of a common, I don't want to say a common thing, but there's a pattern there that I noticed between at least three very well-known ransomware gangs. Was starting out with financial gain related malware or banking malware, and piggybacking on that. And Trickbot was originally used for financial gain type of crime. And yeah, it just was so successful and so prevalent that ransomware gangs just realize, hey, we don't even need an initial access. We can literally go in and buy into this network of victims and look for corporations that are infected and pick our victim and walk right in the front door. So that's what they were doing. And not to say that they still didn't have to find, in some of their attacks for specific targets, they didn't have to find access, but a large portion of their victims came from infected hosts that they just bought their access to, that were already infected with Trickbot. So it was this massive infrastructure that touched so many different systems and nodes around the world that it just really allowed them to cherry pick their targets, in addition to the fact that it was modular, so they could then alter it to use to specific attack environments. And it was just a great resource for bad guys,
Yeah,
unfortunately for us as defenders, but they took advantage of that.
yeah, and as you said, there's definitely a pattern behind that. I expect we'll continue to see that, where as long as this resource is available for them, they'll pivot, they'll adjust their objectives as it suits them, and as their
Mm-hmm.
financial or economics evolve, right? But they're going to continue to use these things that maybe we see for a particular purpose. Just because that's how it was doesn't mean that's how it will be, right?
Right. Well, Wizard Spider also, what's also interesting though is they had access to the source code, and the reason that we know that is some of the other tools and malware variants that they built were developed off of Trickbot source code. So whoever this was, that was the central organization that sort of owned that, if you will, either was providing that, or was providing those updates or helping them develop it, or what I think more likely gave them or sold them that source code so they could develop as they needed. But we saw a lot of that in some of the other tools that they used, which were used for completely different purposes.
Right, right. Yeah. Crazy. So the report also talks about Wizard Spider. Yeah, you mentioned this, having more tools, malware, and sophisticated capabilities than any of the other cartel gangs. But there's one payload in particular in there that's not like the others. Let's talk about that.
You're talking about Sidoh. So Sidoh was really interesting. So CrowdStrike first discovered Sidoh. I believe they're the ones that first discovered it anyway. They're the first ones that reported it that I had ever heard of it from. But it was like a one-liner in I think it was like their 2020 assessment for the whole year. Their their threat and review, and they had like a one-liner in there that there was a variant out there that shared similar code, source code with Ryuk ransomware, but it had an espionage aspect to it. So I was really interested in that, and so I really dug into that more so for the second report. But that is one of the things that really got me interested in the nation state relationships. And what it turned out to be was someone took that source code. They took the Ryuk source code, which only Wizard Spider has access to. There's no evidence that anybody else has access to that. And they modified it to search for keywords that were all related to government, primarily U.S. government, but to government intelligence and government agencies. There were some non-U.S. in there too, but this particular espionage version of it would look for keywords, and once it would find a document or related data that had these keywords or security marking or whatever it might be that was in the file, it would then extract it and send it to a command and control node. So essentially, it went from a ransomware to an information stealer. And though it shared so much code, it didn't encrypt a single file. It was all about stealing government-related data, and it was primarily U.S. government-related intelligence data based off that they were looking for, based off of the list of words that it would search for. Mm-hmm. And we found basically we went and we just started looking at all the Ryuk samples that we could find in the public domain. And what we did is we then looked for differences, and essentially that's what we found. Is we found 5 samples that had these extensive keyword lists that were all government related content. And once we found those 5, we tore it apart, did our analysis, looked for evidence of it being used in attacks, things like that. And that was one of the major finds that we had for our second report, the absolute ransom, the nation state links that we provided in there. That was one of the main ones.
Yeah, and that's a good segue. We'll jump over to that in just a second. I'll say, I noticed you'd mentioned in the report you provided a specific Yara rule that you used to find all those samples.
Yeah.
Where are you getting these samples from ultimately? Like, is it VX Underground? Shout out VX Underground, by the way. But is it public resources like that you're pulling these things from?
Yeah. So we looked in all the the top sandboxes you can think of and resources you can think of, but where we actually got the most hits, where we found all 5 of those actually came from VirusTotal. And I think that they're just the sheer volume of samples that are submitted gives them sort of that advantage.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was that's where we found them, though. I do want to say I think that VirusTotal does a good job in giving the volume, but there's other ones like hatching.triage that have better analysis and things like that. Mm-hmm. But that's neither here nor there. But I found those specific samples though in VirusTotal, and then we did static analysis to really tear them apart. And we wrote those Yara rules, which we provided to everybody, but we wrote them so that we could find additional rules and also look across data, both public and private, to try to find evidence of it actually being used in an attack, because finding that it exists is a gold mine, but finding it used is even better.
Yeah, right. Yeah, awesome. That's some good notes for aspiring researchers there to
right.
follow that
right.
that approach. Awesome. All right, so I'll just say real quick, like there are a ton of really interesting TTPs in this first report we've been talking about. I think there was a lot of articles that came out on this, but you mentioned the innovation or creativity from these groups, right? And one example of that was the attackers bringing their own VMs into the victim's mm-hmm. environment so that they could evade endpoint detection and things like that. Like just really, really crafty stuff, right? So Anyway, I'm highly recommending here for listeners to go dig into the entirety of that report, because it's really, really rich with insights like that. Let's jump ahead to the nation state ransomware report. Now, you mentioned this just a minute ago, the Sidoh malware. That was the first thing that jumped out at me, is looking at the table of contents. Like, here it is, this malware that we're talking about with the Ransom Mafia report
Yeah.
is present there. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So what in the nation state paper, one of the first things that we found was actually years before Sidoh, and it had shared a similarity. There was another criminal group long before Twisted Spider that existed. That was called the Business Club. The Business Club did something similar, where they took there was banking malware, but they took their custom developed banking malware, and a variant appeared that had been modified to use a keyword search to find government related data. Now, in that particular instance, it was looking for, not US, but there was a little bit of US in there, but it was mostly other targets, Turkey, Georgia, places like that, Ukraine, places like that, that just were not the same as the US, but it worked the same way, the same keyword search. Mm-hmm. That was the only thing that was the same between the two. But the fact that it was criminal based malware being repurposed for espionage was interesting to me. So when we found the Sidoh malware doing the same thing, there's sort of a pattern here of seeing, okay, well, this happened before, and now we're seeing it again, almost a decade later, from a decade later from when those organizations first started anyway. So, it was interesting to see that. And that made us, again, want to sort of dig in and then ask the question, if this is a pattern, what else is out there?
Taking a step back to the historical, like the intro of the report, you cover a bunch of historical background with some of these entities that you're investigating in this report in particular. It's all really, really interesting stuff. Why is the history in this particular case so important to the rest of the report?
The history is important because, when we're assessing whether there's actual government intelligence links to criminal organizations, having one link, from public domain, we're probably not going to get, again, the smoking gun itself, so we want to get as much information as possible. So you have to go back and find as many instances and as much evidence as you can, and then find commonalities between the two to show a pattern. If you can prove that there is a pattern, then you have a much stronger argument to support if your hypothesis, which in this case was the fact that ransomware groups were being recruited and used for Russian intelligence purposes. And so by going back to the history, is in finding, even before ransomware, but finding these criminal links and finding examples where key leaders of criminal gangs were being recruited to work for the FSB, that was a really strong tie. And that's exactly what we found. We found multiple examples of where very high up members of notorious criminal gangs, were being recruited, and then their network and their malware capabilities was now being utilized to better the Russian government. That's a much stronger argument than just saying, hey, there's a piece of malware like Sidoh out there that exists that has the capability to steal government related data. But then when you marry all of them together, well, now you have a much clearer picture. And in the report, that's just a couple of the links. We found a lot of good evidence to sort of substantiate that theory.
Yeah, and how far along in this investigation were you before you realized, like, holy crap, we're really onto something here?
So I knew that while I was still writing the cartel piece, just because so many things kept coming up, and it took a lot of discipline to not, go on a tangent and start digging on it, because I felt like that was so interesting. One thing that, that I don't know if the word is regret is the right word, that I wish I had included, though, is, with Wizard Spider, when we found, the Ryuk tie and all of that, with Sidoh, because they do two operations. The question was, well, if there is a version out there that's with Ryuk that's related to it, is there the similar with their Conti aspect and with their Conti payload? And well, we didn't find that, but we did find with these leaks here recently, it kind of came out that that Wizard Spider was in fact, had some sort of communication with the FSB. They referred to it by the street in which the FSB's office was located on, but they clearly were in communication with them of some sort. So, if we just included that as a theory, that would have been substantiated. And it's something that I thought writing it, but it didn't include because I didn't have any evidence to back it up. But I think that's an interesting development that's come out since then.
Yeah, for sure. Really interesting. So you mentioned a few interesting links in there. There's specifically 4 links between the entities and Russian intelligence that you found. Can you, or at least through the different entities, links to them together, and then also links to the Russian intelligence, right? Can you dig into that for us?
So one of the first links that we found was with the business club, which was ran by a gentleman whose last name is Bogachev. And he specifically was recruited by the FSB. He works for the FSB, as far as we know anyway today. He was named by the U.S. government in an indictment, and there were multiple governments that have made claims that he, again, is an agent of the FSB. Now, he ran the business club. His number 2 was a guy named Maxim Yakubits. When the business club eventually fell apart, his number 2 guy, Yakubits, went on to create what's known as EvilCorp. Well, EvilCorp, similar to the business club, began using banking malware for all their operations. And also similar to the business club, once the heat got too hot and they weren't having the same level of success, they modified that malware and they began doing ransomware attacks. Also similar, according to indictments, Yakubits was then recruited to work for the FSB, which is where he is believed to work today. His father-in-law was also a high-up guy in the FSB, and there's pictures of him with Putin and other high-up officials. So he had multiple links, but there's a pattern there of, again, criminal gangs, banking malware, escalating to ransomware attacks, and then the leaders of those gangs being recruited. So those are two links, well, maybe 2 plus, but 2 links right there.
Yeah.
And the third one would really be Twisted Spider and seeing the Ryuk source code being modified to use for espionage malware. We saw that with Bogachev and the business club. Same thing, except theirs was Game Over Zeus, but they modified it, made it espionage. So again, I sound like a broken record, but putting all this together, seeing this pattern, it's too compelling to not consider that this is something that's done intentionally. And then I think the other piece with EvilCorp, another link with EvilCorp, again, which originated from the business club, and when they went on their own, they actually had an attack that took place against a defense contractor, where 3 months later, some of the same infrastructure, some of the same scripts and other things were used on the exact same target, but used by a group that took part in the SolarWinds attack that was also Russian-based and was, according to the U.S. government, attributed to the FSB. So there was EvilCorp, the leader, again, working for the FSB, a separate group that's tied to the FSB, doing an attack against the same target using some of the same resources that the EvilCorp ransomware group used. Again, it's just a lot. So altogether, again, in a nutshell, when you put all of that, I mean, it just makes for too strong of an argument to walk away from without being like, you know what, we got something here.
Yeah, really, really, really compelling. It's just too much of a coincidence, right?
Right. And it's not even like a down in the weeds technical thing where oh, my eyes are going to bleed over. Like, it's such an interesting story. I mean, they're going to make a movie out of this stuff. I mean, the human aspect of it. I mean, I'm leaving out, a lot of the human aspect stuff, but I mean, these guys, they vacationed together, they partied together, they bought fancy cars and created, exotic cars and created car clubs together. I mean, there was just so much to this that's in addition to just the stuff we've talked about that make this so interesting. From a human aspect.
Yeah, totally. So what was which of these links did you feel was like the most compelling example?
I really think that evolution, going from the actual, because we didn't know at the time, but we do today, the humans that were behind the business club, and sort of how that was sort of a seed that's grown into what is a forest today of all these cyber criminals that are top criminals in the Russian, criminal bubble that still exists today that now have ties to the FSB. I think that that's the most interesting part. Seeing Bogachov's, being recruited, seeing their malware then being altered for the Russian government to use for espionage purposes, and then seeing that happen again with EvilCorp, and then I guess the final icing on the cake, and then seeing some of those same resources used by a completely separate group that's believed to be a unit of the Russian government. Those three things together, linking that all together, and then seeing the end result of foreign governments that are adversarial to Russia being compromised in actual operations. I mean, that's like we saw with the modified game over Zeus and things like that. Like all of that, is really strong. But I honestly think it's that human aspect to me personally that shows they're handpicked. It's only the top. These are both leaders of these gangs. They weren't
Yeah.
like one of the small guys. They were the leaders who have access to all the resources. And both Bogachev and Yakubits are believed to have been developers of their own malware. So what they could do in creating new variants and new things for the Russian government. These you got to remember, these are guys that defeated our defenses to have success for years and years and stole hundreds of millions of dollars. This isn't a one-time thing. Like they kicked our ass for a long time. So
Yeah.
my point is that they're being recruited and used. Like that's strong. That makes sense to do if you're a government intelligence agency.
Yeah.
Would you want to go to jail, or would you want to get a cushy salary and get to keep doing your criminal stuff and help your country? I know what I would pick.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. So there was a specific high profile attack or breach that you basically said like EvilCorp, I think it was EvilCorp, right, was
Mhm.
acting with some aspect of Russian intelligence to pull off that attack,
Yes.
right? Which one was it? Can you get into some of the details there?
Yeah, so that was one I sort of brushed over earlier. Essentially, what happened is we saw it was about a 3 month difference, but we saw in EvilCorp it was an attack against a defense contractor, and just to make sure I'm giving credit where credit's due, ProDAF did a pretty good report on the Russian intelligence side of this, where they had found that a group related to the FSB actually went in and compromised this defense contractor. And in it, they had used some of the same domain infrastructure, some of the same custom hack tools, and some of the same scripts that EvilCorp had used to target that exact organization 3 months earlier. The difference being, EvilCorp is out there for financial gain, and
Yeah.
this obviously the Russian intelligence organization was not. So what we kind of saw there was it was almost like they were not that it wasn't that the resources used by EvilCorp were something provide anything special that they couldn't have got on their own. It's the fact that it gives the Russian government plausible deniability. Hey, this wasn't us. This was this criminal gang. And now let's remember, Department of Justice claims that the leader of that criminal gang now works for the FSB. So it makes perfect sense. All these pieces of the puzzle fit together perfectly.
Yeah.
Again, once you have more and more of those pieces together, we might still have some of the center of this puzzle that's not there, but we have so many outlying pieces. We know what this picture is going to look like when it finishes, or we can make an assessment with pretty high confidence of what it's going to look like when we
Yeah.
finish. And that's what sort of these two elements really did, is built that picture for us.
Yeah, it's amazing. Really, really interesting stuff. Coming back to the Wizard Spider and Sidoh link for a minute, you kind of alluded to like something about that situation just didn't add up, and you highlighted the possibility that could be just maybe a false flag.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was an actual malware that somebody was actively using. How much credit do you give that theory?
Yeah, so that was one of the differences, I think, from when we saw, the recruitment of Bogachev in the business club, where Game Over Zeus was used. It was identified, it was used in attacks.
Right.
So while the rest of the story seems similar, we didn't see Sidoh used in attacks. But when we actually tore apart the malware, excuse me, the biggest difference that we saw was that it was amateur hour with the espionage piece. Like it was not the same developer. There's no way the same person who wrote, or the same group of people who wrote the original code in the Ryuk ransomware were the same people that made the newly modified code that was applied to Ryuk ransomware in order to make it into Sidoh espionage malware. So it was different. It was sloppy. And just to give a couple examples, it would walk the system similar to ransomware. It would find a file that had these keywords, and then it would stop, and it would connect to via FTP, which is in clear text and could be caught easily by defenders. It would
Yeah.
connect to their command and control infrastructure, and it would send out this one document. It would close the connection, and then it would continue searching. Even a halfway experienced adversary would collect all their data. They'd put it in a RAR, password protected, encrypted, send it, create some sort of VPN tunnel or an encrypted connection, and send it out that way. I
Right.
mean, it's so easy to identify otherwise. But let's remember, just because it's easy doesn't mean bad guys won't get away with it and it be effective. So we didn't think or I don't think that Wizard Spider is the ones who developed it. I do think, though, that somebody created it, and it was clearly created for espionage purposes. I think what we found was just the early stage development malware, and it was probably in VirusTotal because they probably wanted to use that to see if it would get detected or not, and it was sort of testing things out.
Mhm.
Let's remember, if it is used, it's used in highly targeted attacks, so there could very well be a much more advanced version of this that goes undetected and is used very selectively that we just haven't found yet. And that's more my theory. But I don't think it's Wizard Spider that developed the espionage variant as much as they gave them the source code to use as they please. Again, probably to not go to jail, and to work with the government as opposed to working against them.
Yeah.
And we know that the FSB knew who these guys were, who their real identities were, based on the Conti leaks that took place. We know that the Wizard Spider guys did have a relationship and were in communication with the FSB. So there's no evidence of them using this. I don't think that if they were working directly with them, I think they would have made the modifications themselves. So I think they just gave them the resources and then were in communication, and other things that we don't know probably happened. But that was sort of my assessment: is someone made this for the purpose of espionage. I just don't think it was Wizard Spider, but the only way to get this was either for them to give it or for it to be stolen. And now that we know that, I didn't think when I wrote this that it was stolen, and now that we know they talk in communication with the FSB, it's almost validated. It
Yeah.
clearly wasn't stolen.
Yeah. It was a little bit of a collaborative effort at least. And
Right.
ultimately, you said like you don't think Wizard Spider created this because you had mentioned Wizard Spider was a pretty advanced. Like we talked about
Yeah.
this already, pretty sophisticated, but they were highly evasive specifically, right? Like they were really good
Yes.
at hiding their
Yeah,
presence.
they were the A game guys for sure, for sure, and they were great at not getting caught, and they're highly successful. And like I said, this was so much easier to detect, to find. The code was sloppier. I mean, I just
Yeah.
don't think that it was. It could be a false flag, or it again, or it could be development in something that they were testing out that is out there right now with a more advanced version that we just don't know about.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally makes sense. So not so much a false flag as much as we don't have the full picture yet. Is
Correct.
kind of
But
what it
but
seems like.
even if it was a false flag, it would still be just as interesting, because I mean that alone, that's a different story, but it's still really interesting. So we wanted to explore both aspects of this when we went into it and not make an assumption.
Yeah, yeah, and even if nothing else, I mean, uh, just the connection, as you pointed out throughout this report, like obviously there's coordination, there's collaboration happening here. They got the source code, as a basis for this espionage oriented malware, right? So clearly the government or these intelligence units are working together with these ransomware groups, right? I think it
Yeah,
further
that
proves your point, basically.
Yes, and that's what we found. And again, while I thought it at a human level when I went into this, my theories and our assessments and our conclusion all came from the evidence that we found. And I'll be honest, surprisingly, when I put this out, I got a lot of not a lot. I got some pushback from other analysts, and the reason I got some of the pushback is because it was such a bold statement to say that they're working with the Russian government. But if you really take the time and you read through the report and all the evidence laid out and visual diagrams and everything, that I think you'll come to the same conclusion. And one of the things that I did find is a lot of the analysts that were really hardcore following these groups that did read it came back to me like, wow, this is an excellent report. It's really eye opening, and it was really good work. And I'm not saying it to pat myself on the back. I'm saying it because I worked my ass off on it. And, and I do think I think that we're onto something here. And I really hope that as more data comes out and things that other companies and organizations pick up where this leaves off and continues to put this information out there. Because if we can prove 100% that Russia's doing this, I think that can change the mindset of how we defend against these threats, which is important, as I said earlier, because when you don't protect correctly and you don't handle them in the correct manner or treat them as the threats that they really are, the outcome usually is not good.
It's devastating. Yeah, no, and
exactly.
that validation from other analysts, that just proves the credibility. It substantiates, really what you're putting out there. And I'll second that as well. Like the illustrations that you put together in the report that highlight all of these overlaps, really, really interesting stuff, right? Like I'm not doing it justice here in this conversation. Like you got to go look at the report, folks. Like there's some really, really
Thanks.
good stuff in there.
Well, I try to make it as easy as possible to follow, and I feel like making visualizations makes that a much clearer story.
Yeah,
so
it
I appreciate
absolutely
that
does
feedback.
that. Yeah, for sure. So I think you just kind of highlighted the overall take or the ultimate takeaway. Your overall assessment is absolutely these groups, these institutions within the Russian government, like they're absolutely working together. Gives the government plausible deniability, right? It gives plus they're why not take advantage of these resources that are in country, this talent, so to speak, right? The
Right.
access, the reach that they may already have from the work that they're doing. Like there's just so many aspects of it that if it aligns with your objective as a government, like, yeah, makes perfect sense. So that's really awesome. Any new, you talked about the Conti links or the Conti leaks rather. Any additional new intel since these reports dropped? Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, so obviously, as I won't beat that to death, but the Conti leaks shared a wealth of information. They validated some of the theories we had in our paper, and they also answered some of the questions that we couldn't answer as far as Wizard Spider's further involvement with the Russian government. Also interesting, is going back. This is more from the cartel piece. While there wasn't a cartel, it was our assessment. We did find a couple of things. One, Conti still refers to themselves as part of a cartel, and they did so as of recently as 3 months ago. So there is still a part of that image that they're still trying to present. But also, it was interesting as we found it was another ransomware site on the dark web that called themselves the Ransom Cartel, and the site was just being staged. It wasn't being used yet. But if it didn't exist, hopefully we didn't will it into existence by writing about it. But there might be some copycat groups that are spinning up that are going to try and pivot off of that. So we're keeping an eye out on that. Thought that was really interesting. But with the ransomware piece, there's going to be a number of things. There's other groups that you can kind of pivot off of that are not in either of those reports that have a lot of shared resources and connections, whether they're technical or human. We made it public. We documented that visualization and some of the findings publicly with that as well. It wasn't a report on our website, but I think CBS published a blog with that content on there. But the point being is that there's more to this than just this this story. This is just, even though we did this large scale assessment, there's still more connections out there. And again, that's what I'm hoping. More light's going to come to that. But I think this is bigger than what most people think. And I think that there's a lot of interesting things that are going to come out over the next year, especially with everything going on between Russia and Ukraine, and seeing sort of the divide between different ransomware groups. As these guys turn against each other, I think we're going to see more and more things being released that are going to answer additional questions that we have.
Yeah, we're really just at the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah.
How much fun did you have working on these reports?
I honestly, well, I worked, my ass off on these, but I live and breathe this because I have a passion for it. And so when you sink your teeth into something like this, and there's so much data and so many good findings and so many interesting angles of it, it makes it really fun. And one of the things that I try to do, because I love this content and what I do so much, I really want to tell a good story. I want it to be an accurate story, but I want to tell a story. I don't want to write something that's down in the weeds where only, a reverse engineer is going to understand it because it's so technical that your eyes roll back in your head. I want it to be an exciting, interesting read, especially when you're writing something that's 40 pages long. I want to have that human element to it. I want to have the storytelling aspect to it. So I had a lot of fun with this because they gave me so many cool stories or cool aspects of the story that made it something that I could tell, that made you want to turn to the next page to see what was going to happen, or at least in my opinion. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. There's nothing else in the world I'd rather do. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I'd still be sitting here at my desk chasing bad guys and telling the stories about it.
I love it. That's fantastic. Well, I concur, man. It definitely is a page turner. So that your intent there absolutely comes through. Let's jump into the rapid fire round real quick. I'm just going to throw some questions at you. Just first thing that comes to mind: VI, Nano, or Emacs?
VI all the way.
Love it. How many operating system based devices do you own?
Like devices, I would probably say 20 something, because I got kids. We've got so many in my house. And I probably use 5 different operating systems, 3 of them flavors of Linux. The only operating system I don't use is Windows, and that's because nothing against it. It's just what all the vulnerabilities are against the things that I research.
Right. So you got to stay away from it, right?
Right.
That's awesome. Hilarious. What's your favorite hacker movie?
You know what? I don't think there's been a good hacking movie. There's so many I don't like. Like Black Hat, the movie, not the conference. I despise that. I like the hacker movie. I don't remember what it was called, with Angelina Jolie.
Hackers.
Hackers. From the 80s. I liked it, but it's so corny. It's not a good assessment. So there hasn't been any that I'm in love with. So it'd be easier for me to say ones I don't like than I do like.
Got it. I'll tell you, mine is probably, it's only, just a couple of little snippets in it, but The Matrix is, just for me, like.
Oh yeah. I didn't consider that one. That would be, if I could go back, that'd be my answer. That I love The Matrix. Yeah. That's a good one.
It's great. And the great thing about it is, like, it's just a premise of hacking in there, but it's not the centerpiece of the movie, right? It's everything else. And when they do bring it in, they bring it in the right way, right? Where it's actually plausible, as opposed to Jurassic Park. and
how it influenced the hacking community and how many kids got interested in cyber because of that. So you know what, I agree with that assessment.
Love it. Awesome. Let's talk food. Nachos or poutine?
Nachos. I'm a nacho guy for sure.
Yeah, me too. Especially when you put some smoked meat on top of it, whether it's chicken, pork, whatever, pulled pork.
Done well, it's a feast.
Yeah, awesome. How about on you're a meat eater?
I am. I'm a big griller, barbecue guy.
Okay, awesome. So filet or New York strip?
I'm going to go with New York strip. And the reason I say that is I just feel like if you season that right and you cook it right, it's just a better cut for my personal taste. But yeah.
Yeah, all that fat marbling really makes a difference, right?
Exactly.
Like all that
it might give me a heart attack, but it's going to taste good going down.
Exactly. Last one for the lightning round. What would you be doing if you weren't in the cybersecurity field?
I'd want to be an actor. I always want to be an actor as a kid, be in movies.
Nice. I could see that. You're You're definitely screen friendly, man.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, so maybe someday I'll retire and I'll make some movies or
Right,
do something
exactly.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah. There's always an opportunity for a 2.0 of the career, right?
I'm hoping one of these stories I write, to these papers I write, somebody's going to want to make a movie about someday. We'll see.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and wrap up here. Anyone you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Eric Chen, Vikram Thakur, the guys over at the what used to be the attack investigation team at Symantec. They really encouraged me to take the next step in my career. That really put me out here more to the public domain and to write the book and to support me while I did it. They really sort of gave me that encouragement that made me feel comfortable in doing that. So that'd be the people I'd say I'd want to give a shout out to.
That's awesome. How about charity, foundation, any charitable cause you'd want to highlight?
Yeah, I'm a huge dog person, so support your local shelters. Most of them are sponsored by nonprofit organizations, and most of them desperately need funding and volunteers and time. And like I said, I love dogs, so I mean that would be a charity that I would want. I do donate to and want others to donate to.
Yeah, that's great, and something that's easy to localize, right? Like you can do it regionally.
Absolutely.
You know the money's going into
Yep.
your community. That's a great idea.
That's right. That's right.
Love that. What's coming next for you?
It's hard to get away from ransomware. Not that I want to. So I know I've got I've got my hands in a number of things with some different ransomware gangs that are out there. A couple of them that aren't as well known. But I'm also thinking about really diving into some of the ICS and electrical grid hacks. So when I was at Symantec, I did a lot of work with that with a group that was called Dragonfly. So I'm with all the new activity that's taking place because of that, I'm thinking of doing another wide scale, historical look. How did we get to where we are today? What was the development? What was the motivations? Why did governments do it? And sort of tell that story. I'm thinking that might be my next research paper. I'm gonna go take some time off next week. I'm gonna go to Bermuda and enjoy myself. But when I get back, that's what I think I'm gonna jump into. Just full fledged and see what I come up with.
I love that idea. It's certainly timely. So I'm excited to see what you come up with there. And this has been a really great conversation, John. Super insightful. I really appreciate you just sharing all this knowledge and expertise with us. It's been absolutely amazing, and we'd love to have you back. You got an open invitation.
All right. Well, I appreciate you having me, and I look forward to part two when we do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I mentioned it before we started. I want all the listeners to know, John, just like our previous guest, Tom Hagel, all the early interviewees and podcast participants definitely getting swagged out with the Havoc gear. So you'll have plenty of that coming your way. Love to see you rocking that, and we're going to keep a close eye on what you're doing, and make sure that we let the community know that the great work that you guys got pushing out over there. So thanks again for coming on, and we'll be talking soon.
I appreciate that, and I look forward to it, Tom.
Awesome. Take care.
You too.